This story is a work of historical horror fiction inspired by folklore and psychological themes related to faith, fear, and human morality. All characters, events, and institutions depicted are entirely fictional and not intended to represent any real persons or religious organizations. The story explores the psychological conflict between belief and truth, and the dark corners of human consciousness, not to offend or challenge any faith. The rain fell in soft, endless ribbons, tracing the edges of the carriage window as Sister Evelyn stared into the gray horizon. Her hands, wrapped tightly around a small silver cross, trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper, unease. The letter from the Vatican sat folded neatly in her coat pocket, its ink already faded by the damp air. It had contained only a single line beneath the seal of the Holy Office. Investigate the disappearances at St. Mary's Convent. Speak to no one outside its walls. The words haunted her the entire journey from Rome to Ireland. No witnesses, no explanations, only silence. Now, as the carriage wheels groaned up the muddy hill toward the convent gates, Evelyn caught her first glimpse of the place that had already swallowed 7 nuns without a trace. St. Mary's Convent rose like a shadow against the storm, its stone spires reaching into the clouds like the fingers of a dying giant. The building had once been a monastery in the 13th century, converted during the famine years into a home for orphan girls. Legends whispered that the ground beneath it was older than Christianity itself, once used for pagan sacrifices. Evelyn dismissed such tales as superstition, but the air here carried something oppressive, a heaviness that pressed against the chest. The iron gates creaked open as she arrived. No one greeted her. The carriage driver crossed himself twice before turning his horses and vanishing back down the road without a word. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. Her boots splashed in puddles black as ink. Inside the courtyard, the convent stood deathly still. Windows shuttered, doors bolted. Not a soul in sight. She rang the bell once, twice. The echo vanished into the fog. Then, the heavy door opened a fraction, revealing a pale woman in a black habit. Her eyes were gray, almost colorless. "You are late," the woman said softly. "I came as quickly as I could. Sister Evelyn, from Rome." The woman gave a small nod. "Mother Agnes has been expecting you. Follow me." They walked through dim corridors that smelled of stone dust and candle smoke. Crucifixes lined the walls, their Christ figures worn smooth by countless fingers. Somewhere distant, a clock ticked in uneven rhythm, though Evelyn couldn't find where the sound came from. The woman stopped before a large wooden door and motioned for her to enter. Inside, Mother Agnes sat at a desk surrounded by parchment and candles. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes like dark wells that had seen too much. "So," she began, "they have sent you." "I'm here to help, Reverend Mother," Evelyn replied, lowering her head. "I was told several sisters went missing." Mother Agnes's thin smile flickered. "Missing," she repeated. "Yes, that is one word for it." Evelyn frowned. "And the others?" "Gone to serve God in silence," Agnes said, her voice almost a whisper. "You will understand soon enough. Until then, you are to obey the rules of this house. No wandering after vespers, no entering the west wing, and no speaking to the novices without permission. Do you understand?" "Yes, Reverend Mother." The conversation ended there. Evelyn was given a small cell on the upper floor, barely large enough for a bed and a crucifix. Her window overlooked the graveyard, where crooked stones jutted out of the earth like broken teeth. The wind carried faint voices from the chapel below, soft chanting, strange and rhythmic. It didn't sound like Latin. It sounded older. That night, Evelyn wrote her first entry in her investigation journal. "There is something deeply wrong here. The nuns avoid eye contact. Their prayers are whispered, not spoken, and the chapel light never goes out. Even at midnight it burns." She set down her pen and listened. A faint sound came from the hallway, a dragging, like bare feet against stone. She opened her door slightly, peering into the corridor. Empty. Yet the sound continued, moving away into darkness. She followed. At the end of the hall stood a wooden door with a small brass plate. West wing, restricted. Beneath it, candle wax had dripped in thick, unnatural streaks, as if melted in haste. The air smelled faintly of iron, like blood. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle, but before she could touch it, a voice behind her hissed, "Sister Evelyn, you mustn't." It was the same pale nun from before. Her face seemed even paler now, almost translucent in the candlelight. "What is behind this door?" Evelyn asked. The nun's lips parted, but no sound came out. Then she leaned close and whispered, "The ones who prayed too deeply." Before Evelyn could ask more, the nun turned and vanished into the shadows, her footsteps soundless on the stone. Evelyn stood there for a long moment, the candle flickering wildly in her hand, the air thick with the scent of wax and something else, something rotten. Back in her room, she tried to sleep but couldn't. The convent bell rang at 3 in the morning, though there was no mass scheduled. From her window, she saw lights flicker near the west wing. Silhouettes moved slowly, 7 of them, chanting in low, broken voices. Their habits fluttered, but their faces were obscured by veils. One turned toward her window, and Evelyn froze. Even from across the courtyard, she could see it. Beneath the veil, there was no face at all, only a pale, empty surface, smooth as stone. Her candle went out. The next morning, no one spoke of the midnight chant. Breakfast was silent. The nuns avoided her eyes. When Evelyn asked Mother Agnes about the west wing, the old woman smiled faintly and said, "There is no west wing, Sister Evelyn. You must have been dreaming." But Evelyn knew she hadn't. She could still hear the chant echoing in her mind. Ite lumen tenebrarum non extinguitur, and the light of darkness shall never be extinguished. The days at St. Mary's followed a rhythm that seemed carved from stone. Morning prayers at 6, silence until breakfast, then hours of cleaning, gardening, and study. But even amid the routine, something in the air felt wrong to Sister Evelyn. The silence wasn't sacred. It was suffocating. The nuns moved like ghosts, their eyes hollow, their smiles rehearsed. Each morning, Evelyn woke to the tolling of the old iron bell that hung above the chapel. Yet she never saw anyone ring it. And sometimes it rang twice at midnight when all were supposed to be asleep. On her third day, Evelyn was assigned to assist in the library, a place the Mother Superior called the House of Wisdom. The moment she stepped inside, she noticed the smell. Dust, candle smoke, and something faintly metallic beneath it. Hundreds of books lined the shelves, many in Latin, Greek, or older tongues she didn't recognize. A frail nun sat at the table, cataloging parchment. She wore thick round glasses that magnified her eyes, giving her an almost owl-like stare. When Evelyn greeted her, she only nodded and gestured to a stack of old journals. "These belonged to the missing sisters?" Evelyn asked. The old nun's quill froze. Her voice came like dry paper. "We do not speak of them. We pray for them." That was all she said. Evelyn sat down, opening one of the journals. The handwriting was delicate and slanted, dated only 2 months ago. The first few pages described the choir's rehearsals and prayers. But halfway through, the tone shifted. The writer spoke of dreams where the walls breathed and a voice that hummed beneath the chapel floor. Then came a final entry. "The hymn is almost perfect now. Mother Agnes says one more verse, and we will be free." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Free from what? That night she couldn't sleep again. The wind moaned through the cracks in her window like a child's cry. As she turned over, she heard it. A faint whisper, close to her ear. "Sister Evelyn?" She bolted upright. The room was empty, the candle unlit. Her pulse thundered. Slowly, she stood and reached for her rosary. The whisper came again, this time from the hall. "Evelyn, come see." Her feet moved before her faith could stop them. She stepped into the corridor, the floorboards creaking softly under her slippers. The hallway stretched long and dim, lit only by a single candle flame at the far end. As she walked, she noticed something odd. The portraits of old abbesses on the walls seemed to be facing slightly different directions than before. She reached the last door, the one that led toward the west wing, though Mother Agnes had insisted it didn't exist. Her hand trembled as she touched the knob. Cold. She pushed it open. The candlelight flickered wildly, revealing a long, narrow hallway lined with closed doors. The air was damp, heavy with incense and something sour beneath it. Decay. And then she heard it. A faint humming, the same note over and over, like the low sound of a choir tuning. At the far end of the corridor, she saw movement. A shape in white, a nun, kneeling before a small shrine. Evelyn approached carefully. "Sister," she whispered. The figure didn't respond. She reached out, placing a hand on the nun's shoulder. The body toppled sideways, cold and stiff. The face that turned toward her was perfectly preserved, eyes open, lips curved in a faint smile, though the skin was gray as ash. Evelyn stumbled back, her breath caught in her throat. The whisper came again, but this time it was all around her. "We prayed too deep. We sang too long." She turned, and the doors began to creak open one by one. Inside each, faint shapes stirred beneath the veils. Pale faces, hollow eyes. Then came a sudden noise, footsteps. Heavy. The candle went out. She backed against the wall, clutching her cross. In the darkness, something brushed past her arm, soft, like fabric, followed by the faint scent of lavender and rot. A low, guttural hum rose from the corridor. Not human, not melodic, more like a vibration. "Who's there?" Evelyn called, her voice trembling. A flicker of light appeared at the far end. A lantern. Mother Agnes stood there, face half in shadow. "You were told not to come here," the old woman said calmly. "There's a body. Someone—" "There is no one here," Agnes interrupted, her tone final. "Come back to your room. Curiosity is a sin, Sister Evelyn." Evelyn looked back. The body was gone. The doors were shut again, perfectly aligned, as though untouched for years. Back in her room, Agnes lit her candle and whispered a short prayer over her. But as she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "You must understand, my child," she said softly. "Some prayers were never meant to be answered, and some voices never meant to be heard." Then she left, closing the door behind her. Evelyn sat trembling for a long time, staring at the flame. Her mind raced. Was she losing her grip on reality? Were the missing nuns buried somewhere beneath these halls? Finally, she opened her journal again and wrote, "I am beginning to believe the disappearances were not abductions. They were transformations. These women prayed themselves into something else. Something the church would never acknowledge." The whisper came once more, faint but unmistakable, curling around her name like smoke. "Evelyn, the hymn awaits." And from outside, through the howling wind, she swore she heard a faint chorus rising from the chapel. Soft, rhythmic, and impossibly distant. The same four notes, repeated again and again. Ite lumen tenebrarum non extinguitur. And for the first time, Sister Evelyn realized the voices she heard were not coming from above. They were coming from beneath the floor. The next morning, the convent looked unchanged, peaceful, disciplined, almost holy. Yet Sister Evelyn couldn't shake what she had seen. Every stone, every corner, every whisper of the wind seemed to hide a secret. At breakfast, she glanced around the refectory. The nuns ate in silence as always, heads bowed, spoons scraping rhythmically against wooden bowls. But something was missing. There were fewer of them than yesterday. She counted twice. Yes, 2 faces gone. No one spoke of it. She waited for someone to ask, but no one did. When she rose to refill her cup, she noticed a single drop of red at the edge of the table. Too dark for wine, too thick for anything innocent. It clung to the wood like a secret. By afternoon, she resolved to explore the chapel again. The west wing had been sealed off, but perhaps there was another path. She spent hours cleaning pews, pretending obedience, until she found it. A tiny gap behind the altar, half hidden by a tapestry depicting Saint Mary crushing a serpent underfoot. When she pressed the edge of the cloth aside, she discovered a narrow wooden door, so small she had to crouch to open it. A rush of cold air spilled out, carrying with it the scent of stone, wax, and old earth. Her heart pounded. The candle flame she held trembled. A staircase descended into darkness. Every instinct told her to turn back. Yet something stronger, the same pull that drives a soul toward confession, urged her onward. Step by step, she descended into the cold. The air grew denser, the sound of her breath echoing off unseen walls. The stairs ended in a chamber of carved stone. Candles burned low in niches, their wax long congealed into thick stalactites. Bones were arranged neatly along the walls, skulls stacked like bricks, hollow eyes staring. A crypt, the catacombs of St. Mary's. But it was not empty. In the center stood a small wooden table draped in black cloth. Upon it rested a chalice, and beside it, a book bound in red leather, the surface cracked with age. She approached slowly. The title on the cover read in Latin, Cantus Mortuorum, the Song of the Dead. Her fingers brushed the cover. The instant she touched it, a whisper filled the chamber. Not one voice, many, male and female, layered in a tone that vibrated through her bones. She opened the book. The ink was faded, yet the symbols were clear. Musical notations, like hymns, but the notes were inverted, mirrored, distorted, as if mocking the rhythm of holy chant. The margins were filled with scribbled prayers in different hands. Some ended abruptly, the ink smeared as though by trembling fingers. The last line written read, "When sung by the pure, the hymn shall pierce the veil. When sung by the damned, it shall open it." Evelyn felt her skin prickle. She turned a page and froze. The next sheet contained a drawing of 7 nuns standing before an altar, eyes hollow, mouths open in song. Beneath them, dark tendrils rose from cracks in the floor, winding around their feet. A sound came from behind her. She turned sharply, candle held high. From a side passage a figure emerged. A nun, her habit torn and stained. Her hands were clasped in prayer, yet her eyes were rolled back, white and sightless. Her lips moved, whispering the same verse over and over. It illumin tenebrarum non extinguitur. Evelyn backed away, but the nun didn't advance. She only knelt, facing the wall, continuing her prayer as blood dripped slowly from her nose. Evelyn's voice broke through the silence. "Who are you? What happened here?" The woman paused mid-prayer. Slowly, her head turned, too slowly, as though her neck resisted. Her mouth opened, wider and wider, until it stretched unnaturally, and from her throat came not words but a sound. A deep, vibrating hum that shook the candle flame. Evelyn stumbled backward, clutching her cross. The flame went out, plunging her into darkness. Then, light flared, faint, golden, from deeper within the catacombs. She followed it, unable to stop herself. The tunnel twisted, narrowing as it went, the ceiling dropping lower until she had to crawl. The walls were carved with strange symbols, circles of thorns, inverted halos, eyes without pupils. The deeper she went, the louder the hum became. Finally, she reached a larger chamber. In the center stood a massive stone altar, surrounded by dozens of burned candles and what looked like melted wax figures, until she saw that the shapes beneath the wax were human hands. She gasped, covering her mouth. On the altar lay another book, this one newer, its pages crisp. She flipped it open. The handwriting was familiar. It was Mother Agnes's. The Vatican forbade the hymn, but we could not silence it. Called to us. The first sisters who sang vanished into light, their bodies gone but their voices eternal. I envy them. Evelyn stepped back, heart hammering. The air grew suddenly cold. From the shadows beyond the altar, faint shapes began to stir. 1, 2, 7 of them. The missing nuns. Their habits were tattered, faces pale and smooth as wax. Their mouths opened in perfect unison, and the same forbidden hymn spilled out, soft, rhythmic, and utterly inhuman. The walls vibrated. The candle flames stretched upward, forming thin black spears of smoke. Evelyn tried to run, but the sound pinned her in place. It wasn't just heard. It was felt, vibrating through her chest, her bones, her teeth. Visions flashed in her mind, of a blinding white void, 1,000 voices screaming and singing as one, an angel without eyes hovering above a pit of light. She fell to her knees, covering her ears, but the sound came from inside her skull now. "Stop!" she screamed. "In the name of God, stop!" The singing ceased instantly. The chamber fell silent. When she opened her eyes, the nuns were gone. Only the altar remained, the air heavy with the scent of burned wax and blood. She stood, shaking, and fled back up the stairs. At the top, she pushed open the small wooden door and stumbled into the chapel. Morning light streamed through the stained glass, painting her face in colors of blue and crimson. The church was empty, or so she thought. From the pews, Mother Agnes rose slowly, her eyes calm but glistening with tears. "You went below," she said softly. "You heard them." Evelyn nodded weakly, unable to speak. The old woman approached, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch Evelyn's cheek. "Then you understand now, don't you? There is no death in St. Mary's. Only devotion." Evelyn stepped back, whispering, "Those were not prayers. They were screams." Mother Agnes smiled sadly. "Sometimes, my child, it is hard to tell the difference." And behind her, from beneath the chapel floor, the hymn began again. Soft, endless, beautiful. Ite lumen tenebrarum non extinguitur. And the light of darkness shall never be extinguished. The sound of the hymn lingered in Sister Evelyn's ears long after she left the chapel. Even in daylight, the echo followed her, low and distant, as if trapped inside the walls. Each time she closed her eyes, she could still see their faces. The missing nuns, their lips open in that impossible song, their bodies swaying in rhythm to something unholy and ancient. Mother Agnes had said devotion, not death. But what kind of devotion required silence, secrecy, and blood? That evening, as the sun died behind the spires of St. Mary's, the bell rang for vespers. The sisters gathered in the chapel as usual, their chants echoing softly beneath the high ceiling. Evelyn joined the back row, clutching her rosary. But something was different. The voices were uneven. Some too low, some too high, like a choir gone subtly wrong. The harmony seemed designed to hide another melody beneath it, faint but deliberate. Evelyn strained to hear it and realized with a chill that the tune beneath the Latin hymn was the same as the one she'd heard in the catacombs. Ite lumen tenebrarum non extinguitur. She looked around. The other nuns' faces were blank, their lips moving in trance-like rhythm. Even the novices, who were usually lively, now appeared pale and motionless, eyes glazed. When the Mass ended, Evelyn approached Sister Beatrice, the only nun who had once smiled at her. Beatrice had seemed kind, even frightened, in the early days. She caught her hand as the others filed out. "Sister Beatrice?" Evelyn whispered. "Do you hear it too?" The older woman flinched. "Hear what?" "The other song, Beneath the Prayers." Beatrice's eyes darted toward the door where Mother Agnes stood watching them. Her grip tightened painfully. "Stop asking questions. You don't understand what's at stake." "Then tell me," Evelyn urged. "Why are the sisters disappearing? What's beneath the convent?" Beatrice's lips trembled. "You can't stop it. None of us can. Once you've heard the hymn, it knows your name." Before Evelyn could speak, Beatrice stepped back, crossed herself, and hurried away. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, staring at the candle flame, her hands trembling around her journal. The walls of her room seemed thinner than before, the wind louder, whispering words she couldn't decipher. At midnight, she heard the bell again. 3 slow chimes. The hymn began almost immediately after, a low murmur at first, then a growing chorus. It wasn't coming from below this time. It was coming from the courtyard. Evelyn wrapped her shawl tightly and slipped into the hallway. She moved like a shadow, silent on bare feet. Through the small window at the end of the corridor, she saw them. A line of nuns in white habits, faces veiled, walking in single file toward the old graveyard. Each carried a candle, though the wind should have extinguished them. Their steps were synchronized, their chant perfectly in time. She recognized Sister Beatrice among them. Evelyn hurried down the stairs, heart pounding. When she reached the courtyard, the night air struck her like ice. The procession wound its way between tombstones, finally stopping before the old stone well that marked the edge of the property. Mother Agnes stood before them, her veil lifted, her pale face illuminated by the candles. She raised a small book, the Cantus Mortuorum. "Tonight," Agnes intoned, "the voices of St. Mary's shall join eternity. The Lord's silence shall be broken." Evelyn watched in horror as the nuns began to hum the forbidden hymn. The air vibrated, the candles flared brighter. The well began to tremble. Dust fell from its rim as if something deep below was stirring. "Stop!" Evelyn shouted, stepping from the shadows. The chanting halted instantly. Dozens of veiled heads turned toward her in eerie unison. Mother Agnes lowered the book. "You were warned not to interfere. This isn't devotion. It's blasphemy," Evelyn cried. "You're summoning something." Agnes's expression didn't change. "We are summoning him, the first light, the voice that sang before creation. God's shadow." Evelyn took a step back. "You've lost your faith." "No," Agnes whispered, smiling faintly. "I found it. The Church teaches that God is love, but before love there was sound, the vibration that shaped the world. We have heard it, Sister Evelyn, and soon you will too." She raised her hand. The nuns resumed the chant. The sound swelled, resonant and unearthly. The ground shuddered. The water in the well began to boil, though no heat rose from it. Candles blew out one by one, yet the air glowed faintly with a sickly white light. Evelyn covered her ears and screamed a prayer. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." A blast of cold wind erupted from the well, knocking several nuns to the ground. The light flared and then died. Silence fell. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the courtyard was empty. The candles lay scattered, still smoking. The well stood open and dark. Only one thing remained: a single white veil drifting on the ground where Beatrice had stood. Evelyn picked it up with shaking hands. It was still warm. The chapel bell began to ring again, slowly, insistently, though there was no one to ring it. She turned toward the building. In every window of the convent, candles had lit themselves, one by one, until the whole structure glowed like a lantern in the mist. And from deep within its walls, the hymn started again, softer, but this time different. There were more voices now. One of them was Beatrice's. Evelyn fell to her knees, clutching the veil to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She whispered, trembling, "Lord, forgive them. They know not what they do." But as the hymn swelled, a realization sank in that froze her blood. The song was no longer coming from below or around her. It was humming inside her own chest, matching her heartbeat, note for note. Ite lumen tenebrarum non extinguitur. She pressed her hands over her heart as if she could silence it, but the vibration grew stronger. From the shadows of the graveyard, Mother Agnes's voice drifted like smoke. "You've heard it now, Sister Evelyn. You've joined the choir." And as the moon broke through the clouds, Evelyn saw them again. Figures moving between the tombstones, glowing faintly from within, their faces featureless, their mouths forever open in song. The missing choir had returned. The storm outside had grown violent, its howling winds battering against the broken windows of the convent as if trying to warn Samuel to leave. But leaving was no longer an option. He was deep within something older than faith, older than the building itself. The faint hum from the cracked mirror had not stopped. It had grown louder, pulsing like a heartbeat within the walls. Samuel stood, flashlight trembling in his hand, staring at the shattered glass. Each fragment reflected a distorted version of himself, but one shard in particular shimmered with faint light. He leaned closer, and in its reflection saw a door he hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a curtain of vines near the far corner of the chamber. He moved toward it cautiously. The door was made of blackened oak, carved with strange sigils that resembled the ones he'd seen on the altar floor. Rusted hinges resisted his pull, but when the door finally opened, it exhaled a gust of cold air, carrying the stench of old blood and burning incense. A spiral staircase descended into darkness. Every step creaked like a scream. The deeper he went, the thicker the air became, filled with whispers that seemed to come from the stone itself. By the time he reached the bottom, his flashlight beam revealed a vast underground sanctuary, a cathedral beneath the convent. It was magnificent and horrifying at once. Massive stone pillars held up the vaulted ceiling, each carved into the shape of a kneeling nun. Their faces were frozen in eternal prayer, but their hands were bound by chains. The floor was covered in a mosaic depicting a chalice overflowing with black liquid, surrounded by symbols Samuel recognized from occult texts. Symbols of binding, of sacrifice, of eternal servitude. In the center of the room stood a massive marble slab, another altar, but far older than the convent itself. On it rested an ornate golden cup, engraved with Latin words. Sanguis custodiet, the blood shall guard. Samuel approached cautiously. Around the altar were 6 skeletal figures in habits, their bones arranged neatly, their skulls tilted toward the chalice as if in worship. One of them still wore a rosary, the cross fused into the bone of her hand. He knelt beside them, whispering, "What did they make you do?" As if in response, the air shifted, and for a brief moment, he saw them alive in a flash of memory not his own. The nuns kneeling, chanting in low voices, led by a figure cloaked in red. The chalice overflowing with dark, glistening blood. Their prayers were not to Christ, but to something beneath the earth. When the vision faded, Samuel was trembling. The golden cup still gleamed under the faint light, but the blood inside it moved, rippling, almost breathing. He stepped back. Then he heard it. A voice, soft and feminine, echoing through the chamber. "You found it." He spun around. Standing in the shadows near a pillar was Sister Helena. Not as he'd last seen her in ash and ruin, but whole, young, radiant. Her eyes were kind, her voice calm, but Samuel knew better now. This was no resurrection. "You told me to burn it," he said, his voice shaking. She smiled faintly. "And yet you came deeper. That is how it begins. What is this place?" She walked slowly around the altar, her feet making no sound. The convent was built upon an older sanctuary. Centuries before St. Mary's was founded, there was a sect here, women who sought to commune with the divine, to create a covenant with purity itself. But purity, Samuel, is just another word for power. They wanted protection from plague, famine, war. The thing that answered their prayers demanded blood. She stopped beside him, lowering her eyes toward the chalice. The sisters of the black chalice drank from this cup. They thought they were drinking salvation, but what they swallowed was a promise, one that could never be undone. Samuel's throat tightened. "You mean this convent has been guarding what? A demon?" Helena looked up, and for a split second her eyes flickered black. "Not a demon. A god. The god that listens when the others stay silent." The ground shuddered, and from beneath the altar came a deep rumble, like thunder rolling through the earth. The chalice trembled. The blood within it began to churn. Samuel stumbled back, shouting over the noise, "Why show me this? Why not let it die?" Helena's expression softened again, grief and devotion mixed in her gaze. "Because it can't die. The covenant binds us all. Every nun who ever served here, every prayer whispered in these halls. You've seen the mirror, you've seen the dead, but you haven't seen what waits below." The floor split, the marble cracked down the center, and from beneath the altar, black smoke began to pour out, thick, alive, writhing like tendrils. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Helena's voice grew distant. They called it the Keeper, the one who guards the covenant until the final prayer. Samuel ran toward the staircase, but the passage behind him had sealed shut. The only light came from the chalice, now glowing with a crimson hue. From within the smoke, something began to rise. A shape, immense and shrouded, with arms that stretched into the dark, and a face that wasn't a face at all, but a void filled with whispering voices. spoke without sound. The words formed in Samuel's mind. The blood remembers. He screamed as the light burst outward, the chamber shaking violently. The sound of thousands of prayers echoed all at once, twisting into cries of agony. Then silence. When Samuel opened his eyes, the room was empty. The chalice was gone. Only the symbol of the black chalice remained, burned into the floor where he had stood. He climbed back up the stairs, barely breathing, feeling the weight of every soul that had ever died in St. Mary's pressing down upon him. When he reached the upper halls, dawn was breaking through the shattered windows. The convent was quiet, too quiet. But as he turned to leave, he saw one last thing on the wall near the exit. A freshly written message in blood. The covenant endures. Samuel knew then, whatever had been released, it was no longer confined to the convent. It was free. The sun rose weakly over St. Mary's, but it brought no warmth, no comfort. Samuel staggered out of the convent's crumbling doors, his clothes drenched in sweat and soot, his hands trembling as though he'd just clawed his way out of the grave. Behind him, the blackened building loomed against the dawn, silent yet alive, as if watching him leave. But the blood on his sleeve, it didn't dry. No matter how he wiped it, no matter how he rubbed it against the grass or washed it with water from the creek, it stayed slick, red, and warm. He drove back toward town, every mile pulling him further from the convent, but not from what he'd witnessed beneath it. The radio hissed static. The GPS flickered on and off. His reflection in the rearview mirror twitched slightly behind, moving just a fraction of a second out of sync. When he finally reached the small motel on the outskirts of town, he collapsed into a chair and began recording. The camera's red light blinked steadily. "This is Samuel Greaves," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've just left the St. Mary's Convent outside Charleston. What I found there, what I saw, cannot be explained by faith, by reason, or by science. The nuns didn't disappear. They were consumed by something they believed was divine." He paused, glancing at his sleeve again. The blood shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light. "I brought evidence," he continued, setting items on the table. The broken rosary, a burnt Bible page, and a shard from the mirror. "But I think it's following me." As if on cue, the motel lights flickered. The TV turned on by itself, showing static. Through the white noise, a faint chant emerged. Latin, rhythmic, repeating. "Sanguis custodiet." Samuel froze. The words meant the blood shall guard. He grabbed the remote and shut the TV off, but the chanting didn't stop. It was coming from the bathroom. With a shaky hand, he pushed the door open. The sink was running, overflowing with crimson water. The mirror above it was fogged, but as he wiped it clean, faces appeared. The same nuns he'd seen in the basement, whispering prayers backward. "Deliver us," one hissed. "He's awake." Samuel stumbled back, heart hammering. "No, I broke the covenant. I destroyed it." The reflection's expression shifted, the nuns' faces melting into one, forming a single pale visage with black eyes and no mouth. The voice came not from the mirror but from inside his skull. "The covenant breaks when the blood runs dry, and yours hasn't." The sink erupted, splattering the walls with fresh blood. Samuel screamed, smashing the mirror with the motel's hairdryer. The glass shattered, shards scattering across the floor, but each one reflected a different version of him. One standing still, one screaming, one smiling. He bolted from the room, down the motel hallway, every light flickering as he ran. When he burst into the parking lot, dawn had turned gray, clouds swirling unnaturally above. A murder of crows circled overhead, cawing violently, their shapes forming a sigil in the sky, the black chalice. Samuel jumped into his car and sped away, the tires screeching. His phone buzzed in the passenger seat, though he didn't remember turning it on. The screen lit up, an incoming call from Sister Helena. His heart stopped. The phone rang again, then again. He answered. First nothing, then a faint breathing, then a whisper. "You carry it now, Samuel." "What are you talking about?" he shouted. "You drank it, when the air turned black in the chamber, when you breathed it in." The Covenant accepted you. You are its vessel. The call ended. Samuel dropped the phone, panic clawing at his chest. His mind reeled back to the basement, to the smoke rising from the altar, the breath he'd inhaled as the world split open. The realization sank in like ice. He hadn't escaped St. Mary's. He'd brought it with him. The first sign came an hour later. As he drove through a small Georgia town, people turned to look at him, then fell to their knees, clutching their chests, whispering prayers in voices that weren't their own. One woman's eyes rolled white, and she pointed at him, screaming, "The Keeper walks among us," before collapsing. Everywhere he went, strange things followed, streetlights bursting, dogs howling in unison, crosses turning upside down on church doors. The blood still clung to his arm, spreading up toward his shoulder like veins of red ink crawling beneath his skin. He tried washing it with bleach, burning it, even cutting into the skin. But each time he did, the blood returned, brighter and more alive. By nightfall, he reached the outskirts of Savannah. He parked near a gas station and sat there, staring at his reflection in the windshield. But the man looking back at him wasn't him anymore. His eyes glowed faintly red. His lips moved before he spoke, as though another voice were controlling him. And when he whispered the words aloud, his voice was layered, his and 1,000 others. The Covenant endures. In the corner of his eye, movement. Across the street, 3 figures in black habits stood perfectly still, facing him. The same hollow-eyed nuns from the convent. Their mouths opened wide in unison, releasing a guttural, wet sound, like chanting underwater. Samuel started the car and drove into the darkness, but wherever he turned, more of them appeared. By the roadside, behind trees, standing in rows across fields. Silent, waiting. He realized then that this wasn't possession. It was inheritance. The Covenant didn't just demand souls, it chose successors. As he crossed the bridge out of town, his phone buzzed one final time. A text message from an unknown number. "You are the keeper now. Return to St. Mary's." He threw the phone out the window, but the voice in his head laughed softly, whispering through the static in his thoughts. "You cannot run from what you've become." He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, and for a brief moment, he saw his own reflection in the windshield smile back at him. But this time, the reflection was wearing a nun's habit. The laughter grew louder, the blood pulsed brighter, and as he drove toward the horizon, thunder rumbled behind him, the sound of something waking beneath the ruins of St. Mary's.